Hello, my name is Charles Randolph. Within chronic illness and disability lays a bitter strife, something seen or unseen dictating what you can't do while all you want is to do. As such, I've overcome many challenges in my endeavors, some you'll hear today. However, I don't want this story, my story, or those who may relate to it to be one of pain and conflict, but rather resolve. Embedded within this general information are some of my experiences. I hope these experiences may help others, particularly children, adolescents, and young adults, navigate a life without such attrition. Parents, I recognize your strife as well. Both are in anguish, both wanting to be understood and wanting to understand. Thank you for your efforts, and may this help you as well. This is a synopsized version of what you may experience, beginning with diagnostics, a diagnosis, treatment, and a conversation regarding identity, something those like myself may struggle with. Lastly, there is a purpose to everything here, so stick around, and you might just see it. The diagnostic. Upon having a seizure, you'll see a doctor, most likely a neurologist or epileptologist. I can't stress the importance of seeing a specialist, at the least a neurologist. There are specialists because they have dedicated their education and practice to a specific field. I have been harmed by those who are not, but more on that later. You'll go through a series of exams, most commonly an EEG. This will be held at the hospital, where the staff attempts to induce seizure activity within the brain through stimulus. For example, flashing lights are a common trigger for photosensitive individuals. Sleep-deprived EEG. Stress is a common trigger for people with epilepsy, emotional or physical. We'll focus on physical for now. An excellent method to induce physical stress is lack of sleep. You'll be asked to stay awake for 24 hours or more. During this time, you'll wear a device that records data collected from electrodes attached to your head. Imagine someone braided your hair or had dreads, however, these braids or dreads will be made of wire rather than hair. An MRI to check if there are any physical malformations in the brain or something like a tumor. These are the most common diagnostics. The following tale is directed to parents to consider. I've had a sleep-deprived EEG. My mother was kind enough to invite friends to help keep me awake. However, looking back, I can see that experience as a source of the psychological reinforcement of my feelings of shame regarding my condition and believing I'm a burden upon others. I do not think it was a bad idea, nor one I resent. However, I suggest you speak to your child and decide what's best. Everyone, to a degree, is different, and the child's feelings should be considered. I can't express the vulnerable position you are putting them in. The child is coming to grasp that they can't trust their own body, and you're asking them to trust others now. The fear and prospects of teasing are crippling enough. You don't want them to come back from school telling you that kids at school nickname them shakes. That is, if they tell you at all. I didn't. The diagnosis. Once the diagnostics are complete, a diagnosis will follow. For example, I was diagnosed with drug-resistant generalized idiopathic epilepsy when I was 12. The data collected intend to identify the point of origin, where the initial spark occurred or where the candle was first lit within a dark room. Hopefully, these diagnostics have shed some light. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and sometimes they are inconclusive, such as myself, who had an EEG that was positive for epilepsy, and others when older that were negative despite still actively having seizures, and a vagal nerve stimulator implanted within my chest. In yours or another, I pray they calm that spark or extinguish it as quickly as wetting your thumb and forefinger and pressing them upon the wick. There are 4 primary types of epilepsy and 4 types of seizures. We will start with the types of epilepsy. Generalized. A seizure that affects a large area of the brain, multiple regions. Focal, a specific area of the brain. Temporal lobe epilepsy, seizures originating within the temporal lobe. And childhood absence epilepsy, a childhood condition that may be outgrown and often associated with lapses in attention. The 4 types of seizures. Absence, or petit mal, for example, you stare out into space and are unable to focus or speak. Speaking from my personal experience, These can be described as auras to those prone to have more severe seizures. Auras are like a spidey sense telling the epileptic to find safety. It's an interesting mechanism. Myoclonic. You may experience uncontrolled twitching or jerking, although you most likely retain consciousness. Again, in my experience, these can be a warning as well. I used to experience these in my right arm and my left eyelid when I was younger, commonly brought upon by a stimulus, for example, flashing lights. If I stopped my actions, I could forgo the onslaught of a grand mal. So listen to your body. Sometimes I try to fight it, and it always wins. Atonic seizures, also known as drop seizures, last for around 15 seconds. They are coined a drop seizure due to a sudden loss of muscle tone and fall. And lastly, grand mal is more commonly referred to now as tonic-clonic. These are violent seizures that consume you in entirety. You will lose consciousness, fall, experience severe muscle contractions for up to 3 minutes or more, and possibly take you days to recover. I am most familiar with these, and to express the severity, here is my experience. Mine would last up to 3 minutes, right about that time when you should call the ambulance, and take me up to 3 days to recover from. I would convulse so violently that my shoulders, in particular my left, would move in and out of the socket again after again. By 22, my arm would no longer stay in the socket. The pain was constant. Upon an x-ray, we discovered that the rounded portion of the humerus that rested in the socket was no longer round but flattened with labral tears and broken shards of bone scattered throughout the joint. A surgery followed, and 7 years later, another to repair further damage. Simply put, your bones may grind. I've come to alone pulling myself to the bathroom sink by way of a cabinet drawer to see a bloody face slowly rise to the mirror and a body lacerated from the belly button to the chest, or the awakening to a kind group of EMTs above me in a public space. There is a population that experience this, and for those who do, I commend your strength of character for literally getting back up again. In addition, a specific challenge that may arise on your journey is a struggle with anxiety and agoraphobia, or a fear of places and situations that might cause panic, helplessness, or embarrassment. More simply put, a fear of leaving your home. This can be a struggle to overcome, notably if emotional distress lowers your threshold and therefore increases the likelihood of a breakthrough seizure. I've experienced this throughout my life, and it ranges in intensity. When you leave your home, you are no longer in an environment you can control. That control is a comfort. To this day, whenever I walk into a room, I look for corners or sharp things I could fall upon. My best advice is to consider the environment you must enter as a safe place. Train your mind to feel its benefits rather than its negatives. For example, my place of work provides me with a method to maintain my independence. When those thoughts and feelings arise, don't try to stop them. Acknowledge them and tell yourself it's okay to feel them and that they are no longer needed. In time, these feelings and thoughts will reduce. Now, somewhere between the diagnostic and diagnosis stages, you may have your license suspended or be told not to drive. This is reasonable if uncontrolled. However, it can reinforce the agoraphobia and reduce your independence. This is a struggle, yet with the advances in self-driving vehicles, this may soon no longer be a concern. So, I ask Tesla and others to consider the increase in the quality of life you can provide to a population of people by subsidizing vehicles and/or subscriptions to the self-driving service for those with such a condition. It would be life-changing and give safety to themselves and others. A fantastic health campaign it would be. Any help with this would be appreciated. The treatment. We got drugs and implants. Epilepsy is primarily treated with a class of medications called anticonvulsants. However, I want to make an important distinction as it splits into a subcategory 1, a narcotic class called benzodiazepines, that is clonazepam, also known as Klonopin, lorazepam, Xanax, Valium, etc., and the other being non-narcotic, for example, Depakote, Tegretol, Lyrica, Lamictal, Dilantin, and phenobarbital, a barbiturate. I want to preface the following. I'm not anti-drug therapy at all. They work for many, and in no way are the stories that follow meant to promote the cessation or change in medication. That is a personal choice between you, those who care for you, and a licensed professional. However, I have two particular cautionary tales for you. Within them, information I wish I had known, been warned of, or been educated about. Be aware that these are not over-the-counter medications. These are hard drugs with potentially serious side effects. For example, suicidal ideation, overdose, and death. They will affect your mood and in so doing, alter your hopes and aspirations. This leads me to Depakote, also known as valproic acid, which sounds hot, right? Did Depakote work? To a degree, but I attribute its effectiveness to an induced lifestyle change. I went from an active, vibrant child to a bag of flesh that rested on soft surfaces for long periods, devoid of all ambition. You can call it adolescence, stubbornness. Honestly, I was just pissed off. But eventually, I wouldn't take it, as it was taking my life. I may have been alive, but I was no longer experiencing life, and I knew I wouldn't be satisfied trapped between four walls collecting a monthly check, slowly dying on a couch, face up and horizontal, in a beige-colored open coffin, called a couch, with a TV for entertainment. It was a treatment of death dispelled in capsule form, collected at a pharmacy in a bottle, branded with my name on it. I abhor every moment I lost and every memory as it goes against everything I am. So, I urge you, if you feel yourself changing in a way and there are other options, try them if you can, and listen to those around you. You may have changed and not even know it. You may not like what someone else has to say, but it may be what you need to hear. After a barrage of other medications and combinations, we came to benzodiazepines, or benzos for short. I was prescribed 1 milligram 3 times a day around 15 years of age for over a decade. I state the dosage and time as it would most likely be unheard of today. It is recommended now you only take benzos for 2 weeks as it begins to alter your brain chemistry. Benzos are a subtle, dangerous drug. You may not notice a change, especially when prescribed at a young age. You may not even know it affects you, or you may not even feel it. I didn't. With chronic drug use, a slippery thing can occur where who you are while on them just becomes who you are. You're still forming an identity, maturing, and beginning to ask yourself, who am I? But upon reflection, it expressed itself in impulsivity, risk-taking behaviors, and intense emotions. Also, addictive behaviors at times too. There is an excitement to anxiety and intense emotions. Benzos strip you of that. As such, you seek it. Those who can't walk want to walk. For those who are colorblind, the prospect of seeing a sunset becomes a dream. Like losing someone you love, you want to feel that feeling again, so I sought it out, perhaps in the wrong crowds. I began to drink on the weekends, increasing my inhibitions further, unknowing of the dangers of benzos and alcohol. Many die from such activities, and I urge you not to. Once I quit drinking around 21, what did I do? I became a rock climber, an epileptic rock climber. Genius. Can you see the pattern? Nonetheless, I treasure the time, experience, and people. If you recognize any of these patterns of behavior, I urge you to take some time to reflect upon this and possibly seek further help. In time, the epilepsy morphed into a more episodic type where they occurred in clusters, usually resulting in drastic life changes every few years. For example, the loss of jobs. Medical discrimination is real, more on that later. The inability to care for and support myself due to injuries, surgeries, or seizures, etc. Eventually, the benzos stopped working in their entirety and began inducing seizures. So what did they do? Cut me off. Cold turkey, baby. 10 plus years of use done in a day. I'll never forget laying in my bed going through withdrawals at my father's home and having one single thought run through my mind like a rolling caption moving over a screen continuously. It was so potent, and it scared the hell out of me. I have never had a thought like that before, and it's one to have a thought and another to feel that you can carry it out. At that moment, I knew it was time to GTF out of there. I walked into the living room, my father sitting in his tan recliner, and told him he needed to take me somewhere safe. I don't remember what it was precisely, most likely a detox. Check this admittance photo out. Good times, right? You could sit back, relax, and enjoy the show that was about to go down. I passed out, woke up in an empty room, littered with small mattresses upon metal frames. I felt I slept for at least a day, walked to the common area front desk and asked what day it was. They said it had been 2 hours since my admittance. I lost all conception of time. Minutes were hours, hours were days. I stood lost in this space until I found a point of reference for time out the window. The sun and moon rising and setting. I pulled a chair from the small round tables and placed it near the tall windows nearly butted up to the gray radiant heating units and sat for at least a day speaking to no one. As a scene, a moment, a memory, I still experience it in a third-person perspective as if the person who initially asked what day it was at the front desk turned and began to watch this person sitting in a chair looking out the window. It's a very serene and peaceful moment. I felt peace, a calm in the storm. However, not long after that event, they said I didn't need to be there and discharged me with a bottle of Librium. Although some of the psychological effects had diminished, the physical withdrawals were just getting started. You can only die from 2 drugs during withdrawals, alcohol and benzos, and rather than walking for my college degree, I spent 3 weeks on my father's living room floor going through unmanageable withdrawals. My lymph system inflamed and my skin looked inflated and burned. Movement was torturous and any acute pressure placed upon flesh burned. I could walk by the second week, but it required a cane. Eventually it passed, and I'm proud of making it through that one. The post-acute withdrawals were a particular challenge as well. I experienced horrible anxiety. Leaving the house was terrifying, and the further I got away, the more I felt. It was as though I was vibrating from the inside out. This posed its own challenge, but an additional unique one arose as it made it difficult to distinguish between my auras or a withdrawal symptom. It took me 6 months to a year to fully recover. Implants. I was around 13 when my mother took me to a meeting. A gray room, a cold room, with pale 1 foot by 1 foot laminate tile checkering the floor, and with 2 foot by 2 foot panels on the ceiling decorated with hanging incandescent lighting. A table lay in the middle with chairs purchased obviously for economic purposes, with blue and thin plastic backs and seats. Within them sat middle-aged men and women, most likely parents. I only remember one man speaking, and it scared the hell out of me, and all I wanted to do was leave. Perhaps my fear of becoming him, and ironically, 15 years later, in a way, I did. He was tall and thin with a shaved head. You could tell this was not by choice, but a signature sign of medical trauma, one recognized as quickly now as then. And he spoke a bit oddly. He explained why. An implant lay within his chest. A wire ran up his neck from the implant and coiled itself around the vagus nerve. The device sent an electric current stimulating the vagus nerve, reducing the frequency and severity of his seizures. When active, the current would cause the muscles in his neck to constrict, affecting his vocal cords and causing a cough or change in tone of voice. For that reason, my vagal nerve stimulator is turned off via a magnet taped to my chest. The same magnet can be used to swipe across the chest pre-seizure to increase the current and therefore the stimulation, possibly stopping a seizure from occurring, or done so by a friend or loved one during a seizure to reduce the severity. Does it work? Yes. My seizures last 30 seconds rather than 3 minutes. I could have one the night before and return on time for work the next day. It's helped me a great deal. Yet, this treatment is still considered experimental. and you must meet the criteria to qualify. After receiving the implant, it is necessary to tune it for efficacy, like finding the correct medication dosage. It takes time. During one such procedure, a doctor, not an MD and not a neurologist, sat across from me, late and obviously in a rush. My father, to the right, along an open window, a sunny sky as the backdrop. He made an adjustment and initiated the program via Bluetooth. My right leg lifted and then slammed upon the ground. Air left my lungs and I doubled over. All my muscles constricted. I can never forget his face, like a child who broke the rules and got an unexpected result. I gathered myself, he changed something, initiated it, and again the same result. That was enough. Needless to say, I left with the initial settings I arrived with. By the time we left the parking lot, I began to feel a burning sensation on my skin and horrible pain down my legs, in particular my right. When we got home 40 minutes later, I couldn't wear clothing or stand a sheet on my skin. It was a burning sensation I can only describe as a burn that radiated from my bones. My hair down my leg in patches had fallen out, my skin blacked and blued. I was bedridden for at least 3 weeks and couldn't walk for months. 135 doctor appointments within 1 year later, physical therapy to train my leg to work again, painkillers, and a lot of work. I could walk competently again and be able to return to work, but I still suffer pain from it today. But let me note, do not let this experience deter you from seeking this treatment. In fact, I would recommend it. What occurred is not the device's fault. It is an operator error. The device is an effective treatment, and other than a bit of discomfort at times, the benefits well outweigh the risks. Identity. This topic interests me most as I believe it lies at the core of my deepest insecurities. Who we portray ourselves to be often depends on where we are, our intent to be there, or whom we are with. Now, this, to one degree or another, is ubiquitous across the population. But to those with hidden ailments, epilepsy, chronic illness, people with addiction and alcoholics, PTSD, and the like, I believe its propensity to occur and the degree to which it expresses itself would be statistically significant. As a child, I remember that at 6 years old, at our small town high school, my mother sang and acted out different characters as she rehearsed with friends on stage. She was so happy. I recall my parents' change in behaviors after the divorce, my father's change in dress and speech as he moved up professionally in authority, and my mother's stress on etiquette, mannerisms, and presentation. I can't help but think I observed their effectiveness and applied them to survive, and I can't help but consider how so many others who have experienced trauma in their life have as well. The social mask we wear and the development of those characters, it can be an addiction in itself, the test of a characteristic and the observation of effect. Our once whole identity is now a shattered piece of pottery, put back together with adhesive and painted to reflect our environment's current fad for social consumption. Just who would we be if we left that piece on the table and walked out that door? Something beautiful? There are people I've known my whole life that don't know anything of what I've said in this video, or just a part, not the story, carefully selected clips from the reel composed to express strength rather than vulnerability. They see accomplishments and know nothing of the setbacks, and sadly, many of these learned behaviors have been reinforced throughout the years. One employer I looked up to dearly once said, "Charles, if you're not an asset, you're a liability." They found out I had epilepsy. I was criticized by supervision, transferred, and fired for leaving early for a family emergency in a week. I became that liability. Things like that and betrayal stick with us. All I've ever tried, and many do, is to be that asset and give even more of myself than others, hoping those efforts will be remembered if and when something happens to me. I carried that for a long, long time. Many of us want to be vulnerable and honest, but those like me fear the day we become that liability and burden on others. It's shame. That shame is like stain added to glass, forever changing our perception and affecting everything, including our personal and professional relationships. Who we are when we walk out that door and who we are when we walk in are two entirely different people. So, I guess this is me, hoping they can meet next time I open that door. Me being vulnerable in hopes of bringing an end to that strife. In sincerity, Charles Randolph. Hello. I know I'm awesome, and you wouldn't be here unless you were awesome too. So let's be friends. And friends, like, share, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Damn, I'm good. If I were a glass of water, I'd drink it in front of you. No shame, like a thirsty dog at their bowl just lapping it up. I'm golden, just like the frames.